Ambassador Kyle Draven stood before the massive communication array that stretched across the entire wall of the Emergency Council chamber. His three-fingered hands shook as he prepared to send what might be the last message his people would ever transmit. The blue-skinned diplomat had never imagined that his peaceful life would lead to this moment of absolute terror. The Velcarian homeworld of Thessia Prime had been a paradise for over 2,000 years. Rolling green hills covered the planet's surface, dotted with crystal cities that gleamed like jewels in the twin suns' light. The Velcarians had built their civilization on principles of harmony, scientific advancement, and peaceful cooperation. They had never needed weapons more dangerous than simple tools for hunting the gentle creatures that shared their world. That peace had ended 3 months ago when the first reports came in from the outer colonies. Something was destroying everything in its path. The reports made no sense at first. Entire worlds were being stripped bare, their populations vanishing without a trace. Space stations went silent in the middle of normal communications. Trading ships simply disappeared. Then the survivors began arriving. Captain Lyros of the merchant vessel, Gentle Current, had been one of the first to bring news of the enemy. He had arrived at Thessia Prime with his ship badly damaged, his crew reduced to half their original number. His report to the High Council had sent waves of panic throughout the Velcarian territories. They came out of nowhere, Lyros had said, his normally calm voice breaking with emotion. Huge black ships that looked like they were grown rather than built. They didn't try to communicate. They didn't demand surrender. They just started attacking everything that moved. The creatures Lyros described sounded like something from an ancient nightmare. They were insect-like beings, each one the size of a Velcarian but covered in thick, dark armor that seemed to be part of their bodies. They moved in perfect coordination, as if controlled by a single mind. Most terrifying of all, they seemed to feel no fear, no pain, no mercy. High Counselor Lyra Voss had tried to maintain calm among the population, but even she could not hide her growing fear as more and more reports came in. The enemy was moving through Velcarian space like a plague, consuming everything in their path. Worlds that had taken centuries to terraform and populate were being reduced to lifeless rocks in a matter of days. The Velcarians had tried to fight back, but their efforts were pathetic. Their defense fleet consisted mainly of patrol ships designed to handle pirates and smugglers. Against this new enemy, they might as well have been throwing rocks. The few battles that had taken place were not even close. The enemy ships were faster, stronger, and seemed to anticipate every move the Velcarians made. 3 weeks ago, the aliens had reached the middle colonies. The planet New Haven, home to 12 million Velcarians, had gone silent after broadcasting a desperate plea for help. Long-range sensors showed that the planet's atmosphere was still intact, but there were no life signs. Whatever these creatures were doing to the captured worlds, it was worse than simple destruction. Now they were only 2 jumps away from Thessia Prime itself. Ambassador Draven looked around the Emergency Council chamber at the faces of his colleagues. These were the finest minds his species had produced, scientists, diplomats, philosophers, and artists who had dedicated their lives to building a better galaxy. None of them had any idea how to fight a war. "The message is ready, Ambassador," said technical specialist Nara from her position at the communication controls. Her voice was steady, but Draven could see the fear in her large, dark eyes. The message they were about to send would go out across the entire galaxy. It would reach every spacefaring civilization within range of their long-range transmitters. The Velcarians were betting everything on the hope that someone out there would be willing to help them. Draven activated his personal recorder and began to speak. His words would be translated into hundreds of languages and broadcast to thousands of worlds. "This is Ambassador Kale Draven of the Velcarian Confederation broadcasting on all emergency frequencies. Our Confederation of Peaceful Worlds is under attack by an unknown enemy force. We are facing complete extinction." He paused, trying to find the right words. "How do you explain terror to species that might never have experienced it?" "The enemy appears to be a hive-minded species of insectoid warriors. They show no interest in communication or negotiation. They attack without warning and destroy everything in their path. Our defense forces are not equipped to handle this threat. We estimate that we have less than 2 weeks before they reach our homeworld. Draven's voice grew stronger as he continued. We are offering a full exchange of our scientific knowledge to any civilization that can provide military assistance. We possess advanced medical technology, terraforming techniques, and peaceful energy systems. We have never used our technology for warfare, but we are willing to share everything we know with those who can protect us. He looked directly into the recording device, knowing that somewhere in the galaxy, other beings would see his face and, hopefully, understand his desperation. We know that many species prefer to avoid conflict, and we respect that choice. But if there are any peoples out there who have the strength and willingness to fight, please help us. We are not warriors. We have built our entire civilization around the belief that intelligence and cooperation can solve any problem. We were wrong. The recording stopped, and technical specialist Nara immediately began preparing it for transmission. Within minutes, the message would be racing across the galaxy at faster-than-light speeds, reaching every major communication hub in known space. High Counselor Voss approached Draven as he stepped away from the recording equipment. She was an elderly Velcarian, her blue skin marked with the silver patterns that showed great age and wisdom among their people. "Do you think anyone will answer?" she asked quietly. Draven shrugged, a gesture his people had learned from contact with other species. "We will know soon enough. The closest civilizations should receive our message within 6 hours. If we are going to get help, we should hear something within the next day or two." "And if no one answers?" Draven looked out through the chamber's transparent wall at the city below. Millions of Velcarians were going about their daily lives, most of them still unaware of how close death was approaching. Children played in the crystal parks while their parents worked in laboratories and art studios. It was a beautiful, peaceful world that had never known real violence. Then we try to evacuate as many people as possible to the far colonies and hope the enemy loses interest, he said. But honestly, Counselor, I do not think we can run far enough or fast enough to escape them. The next 18 hours passed slowly. Reports continued to come in from the outer territories, and they were all bad. The enemy had taken 3 more systems and was moving faster than ever. Long-range scouts reported that the alien fleet had grown larger, as if the creatures were building new ships from the resources they captured. Then, just as Draven was beginning to lose hope, technical specialist Nara rushed into the council chamber with excitement on her face. "Ambassador, we have received a response." Draven's hearts began beating faster. "From whom? The Centauri Republic? The Trade Federation?" Nara shook her head. "No, sir. The response comes from a species we have never heard of before. They call themselves humans, and they claim to be from a world called Earth." She handed him a data pad with a message. Draven read it quickly, his hope turning to confusion. Message received. "We understand your situation. Human fleet is en route to your coordinates. Estimated arrival time, 72 hours. Prepare your people for military operations. Admiral Kai-Te Park, Commanding Officer." Draven read the message again. "That is all? No questions about payment? No demands for information about our technology? No requests for detailed intelligence about the enemy?" "That is the complete message, sir," Nara confirmed. High Counselor Voss frowned as she read over Draven's shoulder. "Who are these humans? I have never heard of their species in any of our contact databases." Nara pulled up additional information on her portable device. "I ran a search through our exploration records. Earth is listed as a Class 12 death world in the Outer Rim territories. According to our long-range surveys, it should be impossible for complex life to evolve there, let alone develop space travel. A death world." Draven felt a chill run through his body. Death worlds were planets so dangerous that most civilized species avoided them completely. They were places where the environment itself was constantly trying to kill anything that lived there. The idea that intelligent life could develop on such a world was terrifying. "What kind of beings could survive on a Class 12 death world?" Voss asked. Nara shrugged. "I suppose we will find out in 3 days." As the news of the incoming human fleet spread through the government, Draven found himself wondering if they had made a terrible mistake. What kind of creatures would volunteer to fight a war for people they had never met? What kind of species could develop space travel while living on a world that was actively trying to kill them? But as reports continued to arrive about the approaching enemy, Draven realized they had no choice. The Valkyrians needed help, and the humans were the only ones who had answered their call. The human fleet appeared without warning. One moment, the space around Thessia Prime was empty, except for the normal traffic of civilian ships and patrol vessels. The next moment, reality seemed to tear open as 17 human warships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. Ambassador Draven watched from the orbital command station as the alien vessels took position around the planet. Even at a distance, he could tell that these ships were different from anything the Valkyrians had ever built. Where Valkyrian ships were smooth and curved, designed for beauty as well as function, the human vessels looked like they had been built for only one purpose: war. The flagship was a massive beast of metal and weapons that dwarfed even the largest Valkyrian passenger liner. Along its hull, Draven could see rows of gun ports and missile tubes. Strange antenna arrays stuck out at odd angles, and the entire ship seemed to bristle with aggressive energy. "Incoming transmission from the human fleet," reported Communications Officer Tilo from his station. "Put them through," Draven ordered, his voice steady despite his growing nervousness. The main screen flickered to life, and Draven got his first look at a human being. Admiral Kite Park was not what the Valkyrian had expected. The human was smaller than a Valkyrian, but something about him made Draven's instincts scream danger. The Admiral's skin was a pale brown color, and his black hair was cut short in a military style. But it was his eyes that made Draven step backward without thinking. They were forward-facing predator eyes, dark and calculating. When Admiral Park looked at something, Draven could almost see him analyzing it, breaking it down into useful parts, figuring out how to kill it if necessary. No peaceful species had ever evolved eyes like that. "Ambassador Draven," the human said, his voice calm and professional. "I am Admiral Kite Park of the Human Defense Fleet. We received your distress call and have come to assist with your military situation." Draven tried to speak but found his voice had disappeared. High Counselor Voss stepped forward to help. "Admiral Park, we are grateful for your response. We were not expecting such a quick arrival," she said. The human smiled, showing white teeth that included very obvious canines, predator teeth. "Our ships are faster than most. We need to discuss strategy immediately. I am sending my tactical officer to your station with our preliminary battle plans." "Battle plans?" Draven finally found his voice. "Admiral, we should first discuss terms. What do you require in exchange for your assistance?" Admiral Park's expression did not change. "We can discuss payment after we deal with your immediate problem. Right now, you have an enemy fleet approximately 40 hours away from this system. That is more important than contract negotiations." The transmission ended before Draven could respond. 20 minutes later, a human shuttle docked with the command station. Draven and the Valkyrian leadership waited in the main conference room, unsure what to expect. The human who entered the room made Admiral Park look gentle by comparison. Captain Dobbin Lee was shorter than the Admiral, but carried herself like a natural killer. Her black hair was pulled back in a tight style, and her uniform was covered with symbols that probably indicated how many things she had destroyed. When she moved, it was with the fluid grace of something that was always ready to fight. Behind her came Lieutenant Commander Hyun-Soo Kim, a man whose eyes seemed to catalog every detail of the room within seconds of entering. He carried a portable computer and immediately began setting up holographic displays. "Greetings," Captain Lee said, her tone polite but businesslike. "I apologize for the rush, but we need to understand your situation quickly. Show me everything you know about the enemy." For the next hour, the Valkyrians shared all their intelligence about the attacking force. Captain Lee listened without comment, occasionally asking for clarification or additional details. Lieutenant Commander Kim recorded everything and ran constant calculations on his computer. When the briefing was finished, Captain Lee stood silent for several minutes, thinking. Then she activated the holographic display and showed the Valkyrians something that made their blood run cold. "This is what you are fighting," she said, manipulating the display to show a three-dimensional map of local space. Red markers indicated enemy positions, while blue showed Valkyrian territory. "They are not random raiders. This is a coordinated invasion by a hive-minded species with a specific goal." She pointed to the pattern of attacks. "They are not just destroying your worlds. They are consuming them. Every system they take becomes a resource base for building more ships and breeding more soldiers. This is an extermination campaign. High Counselor Voss looked pale. Can you stop them? Yes, Captain Lee said without hesitation. But not the way you would prefer. She changed the display to show her battle plan. Draven stared at it in horror. You want to use our civilian populations as bait? He said. Not bait. Strategic assets, Lieutenant Commander Kim corrected. The enemy expects you to evacuate your people ahead of their advance. Instead, we leave them in place and use the evacuation routes as kill zones. Draven stood up from his chair. That is monstrous. We cannot sacrifice innocent lives. Captain Lee looked at him with those predator eyes. Ambassador, you called for help because your people are dying. We are here to make sure the enemy dies instead. If you want to save your civilization, you need to accept that some of your people will not survive. There must be another way, High Counselor Voss said. Some method that does not require such terrible choices. The human captain manipulated the display again, showing casualty projections. Your current strategy will result in the complete extinction of your species within 6 months. Our strategy will save approximately 80% of your population and eliminate the threat permanently. She looked around the room at the shocked Valkyrian faces. I understand this is difficult for your people to accept. You have never fought a real war before. But this enemy will not stop until every one of you is dead. We can prevent that, but only if you let us do what we do best. Dr. Yunji Choi, the human medical officer, had been quiet during the tactical discussion. Now she spoke up. We studied your medical technology during our approach. It is very advanced. We would like to adapt some of your healing techniques for our own use. For medical purposes? Draven asked hopefully. Some of it, Dr. Choi admitted. But much of it can be modified to create more effective weapons. Your cellular regeneration technology, for example, can be reversed to cause rapid tissue breakdown. Draven felt sick. You want to turn our healing knowledge into instruments of death? We want to win this war as quickly as possible. Admiral Park's voice came through the communication system. The faster we end this conflict, the fewer total casualties on both sides. Lieutenant Commander Kim pulled up another display. We have analyzed the enemy's movement patterns and identified their primary hive ships. If we can eliminate their command structure, the remaining forces will become disorganized and much easier to defeat. How do we find these command ships? Counselor Voss asked. Captain Lee smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. We let them find us. We make them think they are winning until they bring their most important assets into range. Then we kill everything at once. The plan she outlined was brilliant and terrifying. The humans would appear to retreat, drawing the enemy deeper into Valkyrian space. At the same time, they would use modified Valkyrian technology to lay traps that would be invisible to the alien sensors. When the enemy command ships moved forward to supervise the final assault on Thessia Prime, they would fly into a carefully prepared killing field. What about our people on the worlds between here and the enemy? Draven asked. Some will be evacuated, Lieutenant Commander Kim said. Others will help us by staying in place and providing intelligence about enemy movements. A few will be given weapons and training to conduct sabotage operations behind enemy lines. Weapons? High Counselor Voss looked confused. What kind of weapons could we possibly use? We have never developed military technology. Dr. Choi activated another display showing modified Valkyrian tools. Your mining equipment can be converted into explosives. Your construction robots can be programmed for combat. Your transportation systems can be turned into delivery methods for biological weapons. Biological weapons? Draven stood up again. Absolutely not. We will not use such horrible things. Captain Lee's expression grew cold. Ambassador, your enemy does not share your moral concerns. They will kill your children, destroy your art, and erase every trace that your civilization ever existed. They will do this without hesitation or mercy. We are offering you the tools to fight back, but only if you have the courage to use them. Admiral Park's voice came through the speakers again. I am sending additional technical teams to begin converting your industrial facilities for wartime production. We estimate we have 36 hours before the enemy arrives. I suggest you use that time to decide whether you want to survive this war. After the humans left the conference room, The Valkyrian leadership sat in stunned silence. Everything they believed about civilization, about the proper way to solve conflicts, had been turned upside down in a single meeting. "Are we making a deal with monsters?" High Counselor Voss asked quietly. The first battle happened at the mining colony of Theta Centauri, exactly as Captain Lee had predicted. Ambassador Draven watched from the command center aboard the human flagship, Soul's Pride, as the enemy fleet dropped out of hyperspace near the industrial world. Through the tactical displays, he could see the alien ships in perfect detail, massive black vessels that looked like they had been grown rather than built, their surfaces covered in organic-looking armor and weapon clusters. Contact. "In 7 minutes," reported Lieutenant Commander Kim from his position at the tactical station. His fingers moved across the control surface with practiced efficiency, coordinating the movements of 17 human warships and 43 converted Valkyrian vessels. Draven still could not believe how quickly the humans had transformed his people's peaceful ships into instruments of war. Mining vessels now carried missile launchers. Medical transports had been fitted with jamming equipment. Even civilian passenger liners had been converted into troop carriers and mobile command posts. Colonel Wu Jin Nam stood at the center of the command bridge, coordinating the ground forces that were already in position on Theta Centauri. Unlike the naval officers, the colonel wore different armor that seemed designed for close combat. His weapons were smaller but looked far more personal and deadly. "Ground teams report ready," he announced. "All civilians have been moved to designated safe zones. Volunteer militia units are in position." Draven winced at the mention of militia units. These were Valkyrian civilians who had volunteered to stay behind and fight. The humans had given them basic weapons training and simple explosive devices, then positioned them in key locations throughout the colony. Most of them would probably die, but the humans insisted their sacrifice would save thousands of others. "Enemy fleet is moving into attack formation," Captain Lee reported from her position next to Admiral Park. 15 heavy assault ships, approximately 40 support vessels, no command ships visible. "They are being careful," Admiral Park observed. "They learned from our previous encounters that we are more dangerous than we appear." The previous encounters had been small skirmishes, as the human fleet had appeared to retreat through Valkyrian space. Each time, the humans had allowed the enemy to attack isolated outposts and supply convoys. Each time, the aliens had won the battle but suffered far heavier casualties than they expected. The Ravager swarm was learning that these new opponents were different from the peaceful Valkyrians, but they had not yet understood just how different. "Initiating Phase 1, Captain Lee announced. On the tactical display, Draven watched as half the human fleet suddenly broke formation and began what appeared to be a panicked retreat. The ships scattered in different directions, their movements looking chaotic and unplanned. The enemy responded exactly as the humans had predicted. The alien ships surged forward, moving to cut off the retreating vessels and prevent their escape. In their eagerness to destroy the humans, they moved past the concealed defensive positions that had been prepared around the colony. "Phase 2, Admiral Park ordered. The mining equipment that engineer So-Min Han had converted into weapons suddenly activated across the surface of Theta Centauri. Massive drilling charges that had been positioned in asteroid mining tunnels exploded simultaneously, sending clouds of high-velocity debris into the path of the enemy ships. At the same time, the retreating human vessels suddenly reversed course and began attacking the alien fleet from behind. The scattered formation that had looked like panic was actually a carefully planned encirclement. Draven watched in fascination as the humans demonstrated their approach to warfare. Where the Valkyrians had tried to minimize damage and casualties, the humans maximized them with surgical precision. Every shot was calculated to cause the most destruction possible. Every maneuver was designed to put the enemy at maximum disadvantage. "Enemy ships are adapting to our tactics," Lieutenant Commander Kim reported. "They are trying to withdraw from the engagement zone." "Negative," Admiral Park said calmly. "Initiate Phase 3. Sergeant Jae-Young Seo's voice came through the communication system from her position on the planet's surface. "Special operations teams are in position, beginning harassment protocol." What happened next made Draven understand why other species might fear humans more than they feared the Ravager swarm. The Valkyrian militia units that had been positioned throughout the colony were not just armed with simple explosives. The humans had trained them in psychological warfare techniques that the peaceful aliens had never imagined. Using the colony's communication systems, the militia began broadcasting false intelligence about human fleet movements. They reported phantom reinforcements arriving, described weapons systems that did not exist, and created the impression that the human forces were far larger than they actually were. At the same time, Sergeant Seo's special operations teams began, targeting specific enemy ships with what she called precision harassment. Using modified Valkyrian medical scanners, they had identified the weak points in the alien vessel designs. Small teams armed with portable weapons began attacking these vulnerable areas with devastating effect. "How are they doing so much damage with such small weapons?" Draven asked Dr. Choi, who was monitoring the medical and technical aspects of the battle. The human doctor pulled up a detailed analysis on her screen. "We studied the enemy ship designs and found that they rely heavily on biological components. Their armor is essentially living tissue, which means it can heal from damage over time. But it also means it is vulnerable to the right kind of medical intervention." She showed him how the human weapons had been modified using Valkyrian medical technology. Instead of simply trying to punch holes in the enemy ships, they were delivering targeted biological agents that caused the living armor to break down at the molecular level. "We are not just shooting at them," Dr. Choi explained. "We are giving their ships cancer." The battle turned decisively in favor of the human fleet when the enemy commander made a critical mistake. Frustrated by the unexpected resistance and confused by the false intelligence, the alien ships moved into a tighter formation to concentrate their firepower. "Now!" Admiral Park ordered. Engineer Han activated the trap she had spent weeks preparing. Hidden throughout the asteroid belt around Theta Centauri were mining charges that had been converted into massive space mines. But instead of simply exploding, they released clouds of modified nanoscale mining robots that the humans had programmed for a very different purpose. The tiny machines swarmed over the enemy ships, seeking out the biological components in their hulls. Within minutes, the alien vessels found themselves unable to maintain structural integrity as their living armor was systematically consumed by microscopic predators. "Biological weapon deployment successful," Engineer Han reported with satisfaction. "Enemy fleet cohesion dropping to critical levels." Draven watched in horrified fascination as the enemy ships began to fall apart. The aliens tried to retreat, but the human fleet was already moving to cut off their escape routes. What had started as an enemy assault on a helpless mining colony had become a carefully orchestrated slaughter. "Survivors?" Admiral Park asked, as the last enemy ship was destroyed. "Negative," Lieutenant Commander Kim reported. "No escape pods, no distress signals. Complete elimination achieved." Colonel Nam's voice came through from the surface. "Ground teams report minimal casualties. Total Valkyrian losses, 37 militia volunteers, 12 civilian support staff. Enemy ground forces eliminated." Draven stared at the casualty reports. 49 of his people had died, which seemed like a terrible loss. But the humans had eliminated an entire enemy fleet that would have gone on to destroy dozens of other worlds. "Is this how all your battles will go?" he asked Admiral Park. The human commander considered the question seriously. This was a relatively simple engagement. The enemy made predictable choices, and we had time to prepare the battlefield. Future battles will be more difficult as they learn to adapt to our methods. Captain Lee pulled up strategic projections on the main display. "The enemy will now know that we can destroy their standard assault fleets. They will start sending larger forces and be more careful about walking into our traps." "Which means?" High Counselor Voss asked. She had insisted on observing the battle despite the danger. "Which means we need to become more creative," Dr. Choi said, with what Draven was beginning to recognize as typical human enthusiasm for solving deadly problems. She activated a new set of displays showing biological research data. "We captured samples of the enemy ship's living armor during the battle. Combined with Valkyrian medical technology, we should be able to develop even more effective weapons." "More effective how?" Draven asked, though he was not sure he wanted to know the answer. "Right now, our biological weapons can damage their ships," Dr. Choi explained. "But if we can decode their biological communication systems, we might be able to do something much more interesting." Lieutenant Commander Kim pulled up tactical analysis data. "The enemy ships appear to be controlled by a form of biological networking. If we can interfere with that network, we might be able to turn their own vessels against them. 3 weeks after the victory at Theta Centauri, Ambassador Draven stood in the human medical laboratory aboard the Soul's Pride and realized that his people had made a terrible mistake. Dr. Jin A. Park, the fleet's bioweapons specialist, was explaining her latest research to a group of Velkarian scientists. What she was describing made Draven's skin turn pale with horror. The Ravager communication system operates through biological radio waves, Dr. Park said, manipulating a holographic display that showed the internal structure of captured alien tissue. Each individual is connected to the hive mind through specialized organs that we have successfully isolated and analyzed. The Velkarian scientists listened with growing unease as the human doctor described how she had reverse-engineered the alien biology. Dr. Park was small even by human standards, but her calm discussion of biological warfare made her seem far more dangerous than any of the armed soldiers. Using modified Velkarian medical equipment, we can now broadcast signals on the same frequencies the Ravagers use for communication, she continued. But instead of coordination signals, we send interference patterns that cause severe neurological disruption. One of the Velkarian researchers raised a trembling hand. Dr. Park, are you saying that you can drive the enemy insane? That is one possible application, Dr. Park replied matter-of-factly. We can also cause them to attack each other, forget their mission parameters, or experience crippling pain responses. The hive mind structure that makes them so effective in battle also makes them extremely vulnerable to the right kind of signal manipulation. Draven watched the demonstration with growing horror. On the laboratory screen, captured Ravager specimens writhed in agony as Dr. Park activated different signal patterns. The creatures that had been so terrifying in battle now looked like helpless victims being tortured by an invisible force. This seems, he started to say, then stopped. He had been about to say wrong, but the words would not come. How could anything be wrong if it helped save his people? Commander Yuri Kang entered the laboratory carrying a datapad filled with intelligence reports. She was the human fleet specialist in what they called information warfare, and her work had proven even more disturbing than the biological weapons. We have successfully infiltrated the enemy communication network, she announced. Phase 4 of the operation is ready to begin. Admiral Park activated the main communication system from his position on the command bridge. All ships, prepare for Operation Mindbreak. Begin deployment of psychological warfare packages. What happened next would haunt Draven for the rest of his life. Using the captured communication technology, the human fleet began broadcasting specially designed signals into Ravager-controlled space. But these were not simple jamming signals or interference patterns. These were carefully crafted messages designed to exploit weaknesses in the hive mind structure. Commander Kang had spent weeks studying captured Ravager brains, learning how their collective consciousness operated. She had discovered that the individual aliens had almost no sense of personal identity. They existed only as part of the larger group mind. This made them incredibly efficient in battle, but it also created a critical vulnerability. We are teaching them to be individuals, she explained to the horrified Velkarian observers. We are broadcasting concepts of personal identity, self-doubt, and independent thought directly into their neural networks. The results were immediate and devastating. Across 3 star systems, Ravager fleets suddenly stopped their coordinated attacks and began fighting among themselves. Individual aliens started questioning orders, experiencing emotions they had never felt before, and making decisions based on personal survival rather than hive benefit. Captain Donghyun Cho, leader of the experimental Ghost Protocol unit, provided real-time updates from his position near the enemy lines. His ships were equipped with advanced stealth technology that allowed them to observe the psychological warfare effects up close. Enemy fleet cohesion has dropped by 60%, he reported. Individual ships are breaking formation. Several vessels have stopped responding to command signals entirely. Dr. Jin A. Park monitored the biological effects of the psychological warfare through remote sensors. Neurological stress levels in target population approaching critical thresholds. Estimate complete breakdown of hive mind structure within 48 hours. High Counselor Voss, who had been observing the operation from the command center, finally found her voice. You are destroying their minds. You are making them suffer in ways we cannot even imagine. Admiral Park turned to look at her with those calm, predator eyes. Counselor, they were coming to exterminate your entire species. Every Ravager that suffers a mental breakdown is a world full of your people that lives to see another day. But the cruelty of it, she protested, is necessary. Captain Lee finished. This enemy shows no mercy, takes no prisoners, and offers no terms for surrender. They understand only total war, so that is what we are giving them. Commander Kong pulled up strategic displays showing the expanding zone of psychological warfare effects. The beautiful thing about this approach is that it spreads naturally through their communication network. Every message they send to coordinate their fleets carries our psychological viruses to new targets. Draven watched the tactical displays as entire Ravager battle groups simply stopped functioning. Ships drifted without power as their crews struggled, with emotions and concepts they had never been designed to handle. Some vessels began attacking their own allies as individual Ravagers tried to protect themselves from perceived threats. How far will this spread? He asked quietly. As far as their communication network reaches, Dr. Park replied. Every Ravager connected to the hive mind will eventually be affected. The psychological breakdown will continue until their entire species loses the ability to function as a collective. The implications hit Draven like a physical blow. You are not just defeating them in battle. You are destroying their entire way of life. Their way of life involves exterminating other species, Admiral Park pointed out. We are simply ensuring they no longer have the ability to do that. Captain Cho's voice came through the communication system with an update that made the situation even more disturbing. Admiral, we are detecting secondary effects in the psychological warfare zone. Some Ravager groups are experiencing what appears to be complete personality dissolution. Explain, Admiral Park ordered. Individual aliens are losing all sense of identity and purpose. They are not just becoming independent from the hive mind, they are becoming functionally catatonic. Estimate 70% of affected population will be unable to care for themselves within 1 week. Dr. Park checked her biological monitoring data. Confirmed. The transition from hive mind to individual consciousness is more traumatic than anticipated. Most subjects appear to be experiencing complete psychological collapse. High Counselor. Voss stood up from her observation chair, her face pale with shock. You are committing genocide. You are destroying an entire species not through killing, but through psychological torture. The human officers exchanged glances, and Draven realized they had anticipated this reaction. Counselor, Admiral Park said patiently, we offered them the opportunity to communicate, to negotiate, to find a peaceful solution. They responded by trying to exterminate your people. We are simply ensuring they never have the opportunity to make that choice again. Captain Lee activated additional displays showing the strategic situation across the galaxy. This psychological warfare campaign will end the threat permanently. No future generations of Ravagers will ever be able to organize large-scale military operations. They will become a species of individuals incapable of the coordination that made them so dangerous, and incapable of art, culture, or scientific advancement, Draven said quietly. You are turning them into broken shells of what they once were. What they once were was a species dedicated to destroying all other intelligent life, Commander Kang pointed out. We are giving them the opportunity to become something else, even if that transition is difficult. Dr. Ginny Park was already working on the next phase of the operation. Her screen showed research into even more advanced biological weapons, including ones that could permanently alter the genetic structure of enemy populations. If the psychological approach proves insufficient, we have several biological alternatives, she said. We can modify their reproductive systems to prevent future generations from developing hive mind capabilities. We can introduce genetic changes that make them biologically incapable of aggression. We can even alter their brain chemistry to make them naturally peaceful. Draven stared at her in horror. You would change them at the genetic level? Remove their ability to choose their own nature? If necessary, Dr. Park replied calmly. The goal is to ensure they never again pose a threat to peaceful species like yours. As reports continued to come in from across the war zone, it became clear that the human strategy was succeeding beyond their wildest expectations. The Ravager swarm was not just being defeated, it was being systematically dismantled as a functioning civilization. But the cost of that victory was becoming clear to the Valkyrians. They had called for help from warriors, and warriors had answered. 6 weeks after the psychological warfare campaign began, Fleet Admiral Sung-Ho Lee arrived with the human reinforcement fleet to oversee the final phase of Operation Deathworld. Ambassador Draven had thought Admiral Park was intimidating, but Fleet Admiral Lee was something entirely different. Where Park was calculating and professional, Lee radiated the kind of casual confidence that came from winning wars that other people thought were impossible. His presence on the command bridge made even the veteran human officers stand a little straighter. "Status report," Fleet Admiral Lee requested as he reviewed the tactical displays showing the current state of Ravager space. "Psychological warfare effects have spread through 93% of known enemy territory," reported Commander Kang. "Hive mind cohesion has collapsed in all monitored sectors. Organized resistance has effectively ended." Captain Mira Jung, pilot of the experimental weapon platform Thunder Mountain, provided additional details. "Remaining Ravager populations are scattered in small groups with no coordination capabilities. Most appear to be struggling with basic survival functions." Draven watched the strategic display with mixed emotions. The red zones that had represented the terrifying advance of the Ravager swarm were now marked in yellow, indicating defeated, but still inhabited territory. The threat to Valkyrian civilization was over, but what the humans had done to achieve that victory still haunted him. "Admiral," he said quietly, "surely this is enough. The enemy can no longer threaten anyone. There is no need for further violence." Fleet Admiral Lee turned to look at him with those disturbingly calm human eyes. "Ambassador, the current situation is not stable. The Ravagers are suffering, but they are still alive. Suffering beings eventually recover, and when they do, they remember who caused their pain." Ambassador Tae-hyun, "Oh," the human diplomatic liaison, pulled up historical analysis data on his portable display. "Our studies of similar conflicts show that incomplete victories often lead to future revenge wars. The Ravagers may be broken now, but their biology will eventually adapt to individual consciousness. When it does, they will seek to return to their previous way of life." "So what do you propose?" High Counselor Voss asked, though her voice suggested she was afraid of the answer. Fleet Admiral Lee activated the holographic display and showed them Operation Deathworld in its complete form. What Draven saw made him understand why the humans had named it after their home world. "We are going to solve this problem permanently," the Fleet Admiral announced. "Using modified Valkyrian terraforming technology, we will transform the core Ravager worlds into environments that cannot support their current biological form." The plan was breathtaking in its scope and terrifying in its implications. The humans intended to reshape entire planets, turning the Ravager homeworlds into places where their species could survive only by becoming something completely different. Captain Jung was responsible for deploying the terraforming weapons, and her enthusiasm for the project was obvious. "We have identified 17 core worlds that support the majority of Ravager population. By altering their atmospheric composition and surface conditions, we can force rapid evolutionary adaptation." "Evolutionary adaptation?" Draven asked weakly. Dr. Jin A. Park, who had spent weeks preparing the biological components of the operation, provided the details. "The environmental changes will make it impossible for Ravagers to survive in their current form. However, we have also introduced genetic modification viruses that will allow them to adapt to the new conditions." She showed him the genetic modifications that would be forced on the enemy population. The new Ravagers would be smaller, weaker, and biologically incapable of forming hive-mind connections. They would also have enhanced capacity for individual creativity and reduced aggressive impulses. "You are changing them into a completely different species," High Counselor Voss said in shock. "We are giving them the opportunity to become a peaceful species," Fleet Admiral Lee corrected. "They will retain their intelligence and their basic biology, but they will no longer be capable of organized violence on a large scale." Ambassador O pulled up projections showing how the modified Ravagers would develop over the next several centuries. Long-term modeling suggests they will eventually develop art, literature, and peaceful scientific research. They will become productive members of galactic civilization instead of a threat to it. But they will not be the same people, Draven protested. You are destroying their culture, their history, their entire way of being. Their culture was built around exterminating other species, Captain Young pointed out. Their history was a record of genocide and destruction. Their way of being was incompatible with the existence of any other intelligent life. Fleet Admiral Lee began the final phase of the operation with a simple command. All units begin terraforming deployment. Execute Operation Deathworld. What followed was a demonstration of human technological capability that left the Valkyrians speechless. The human fleet, now numbering over 200 ships, moved through Ravager space like a force of nature. Planet after planet was transformed, with mechanical precision. The terraforming weapons did not simply destroy the Ravager worlds. They rebuilt them according to human specifications. Atmospheric processors changed the air composition. Orbital platforms adjusted solar radiation levels. Genetic modification viruses were deployed through the water supply systems. Within days, the Ravager homeworlds became places where only the modified version of their species could survive. Biological adaptation proceeding ahead of schedule. Dr. Park reported as monitoring stations tracked the genetic changes spreading through the enemy population. 90% of subjects are successfully transitioning to the modified genome. Mortality rates are within acceptable parameters. Draven watched the reports with growing horror and fascination. The humans were performing species-wide surgery on their enemies, cutting away the parts that made them dangerous while preserving everything necessary for survival. How long before the transformation is complete? He asked. Full adaptation should occur within 6 months, Captain Young replied. The modified Ravagers will retain most of their memories and knowledge, but they will no longer be able to form the neural connections necessary for hive mind operation. Ambassador O showed him cultural projections for the modified species. Within a generation, they should begin developing individual art forms and personal relationships. Within 10 generations, they will probably have democratic governments and peaceful trade relationships with neighboring species. And if they ever try to return to their old ways? High Counselor Voss asked. Fleet Admiral Lee smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. The genetic modifications include fail-safe mechanisms. Any attempt to restore hive mind capabilities or organize large-scale military operations will trigger biological breakdown. They are now physically incapable of becoming a threat again. As the final phase of Operation Deathworld neared completion, Draven found himself struggling with conflicting emotions. The threat to his people was over, permanently. The Ravager swarm would never again sweep across the galaxy, destroying peaceful civilizations. But the price of that security was the complete transformation of an entire species. Admiral, he said to Fleet Admiral Lee, what you have done here, it is both terrible and necessary. How do your people live with such power? The human commander considered the question seriously. Ambassador, every species that develops interstellar travel eventually faces this choice. They can choose to be victims, aggressors, or guardians. We chose to be guardians. But guardians of what? High Counselor Voss asked. If you can reshape entire species to fit your vision of what they should be, what makes you different from conquerors? Captain Mira Jung answered before the Admiral could respond. Because we leave when the job is done. Conquerors stay to rule their victims. We accomplish our objective and go home. And that, Draven realized, was exactly what they were doing. As the last Ravager world completed its transformation, the human fleet began preparing for departure. The massive warships that had seemed so terrifying when they first arrived now seemed almost protective as they prepared to leave Valkyrian space. Fleet Admiral Lee transmitted his final report to the Valkyrian government. Operation Deathworld is complete. The Ravager threat has been permanently neutralized. Modified enemy populations are adapting successfully to their new biological parameters. Monitoring stations have been established to track their development. Admiral Park, who would be staying behind with a small observation force, provided additional details. The monitoring stations are automated and will not interfere with natural development of the modified populations. They will simply ensure that the genetic modifications remain stable. What about us? Ambassador Draven asked. What happens to the Valkyrian Confederation now? You continue your lives, Fleet Admiral Lee said simply. You return to your peaceful pursuits, your scientific research, your art and culture. The galaxy is safe for civilizations like yours to exist. But we will never forget what we have seen, High Counselor Voss said quietly. No, the Fleet Admiral agreed. You will remember that peace has a price, and sometimes that price must be paid by people who are willing to do terrible things for necessary reasons.